This is what the word of the Lord has to tell us this morning. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. You are blessed when they insult you and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven. For that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Today we're continuing talking about what does it mean to be blessed. Also, I think a few of you will like this. Look at this. No iPad, just all printed paper. I don't know how this is going to go. I might get a paper cut. We might have to rush something up here. I'm not used to it, okay? But today we're talking about what it really means to be blessed. And we hear this word blessing all the time, don't we? Right? If you sneezed, I say, God bless you. In other words, hey, I hope that whatever caused you to sneeze doesn't get worse. So I hope that your health is blessed. We also pray blessings over people all the time, that they might have money enough to prosper. We might also believe that it's a blessing for general prosperity. We say, God bless America, right? We're saying we want to see America do great. And so we want to see all the wonderful things that come with that. We also believe that blessing is maybe wisdom or excellence, right? We pray over doctors when we're sick. We pray over our surgeons. We see athletes all the time when they are talking about how awesome and athletic they are. They just say, I am just so blessed. Now, these blessings might be general goodness and mercy from God, and those are great. But are these the blessings that are the ultimate blessings that God has to give us? So I'm 5'4", I'm not playing in the NBA. Did I miss out on my athletic blessing? Or does God have something else for us? Something that doesn't pass away. Something that doesn't corrupt or corrode. Because I believe that God, who is not corruptible, wouldn't just give us little blessings here and there, tell us to get it while the getting's good. He would give us something that lasts, like He lasts. Because here's the truth. Why all the things that you look at as blessings today, we will all eventually die. That's not very healthy. And you go, well, what if Jesus comes again tomorrow? I hope so. They've been waiting for Jesus to come again tomorrow for 2,000 years. That's a lot of people passing away. You know, you say it's a blessing to have a full bank account, but you can't take your money and stuff with you. You say it's a blessing to have a great career, a great business, but they'll replace you. They always have, they always will. All of our earthly relationships also end as they exist here. They're different. And so what are the blessings that God gives us that actually last? What are the blessings that God gives us that maybe goes over and beyond health, wealth, and prosperity? The real blessings that Jesus are talking about are not corruptible, and you cannot lose them. So if that's the case, what does being blessed actually mean? And more important than that, maybe, is how in the world do I get those blessings? Amen? So today we're talking about what does it mean to be blessed. Specifically, what does it mean that the humble are blessed? Let me remind you of where we're at in the book of Matthew. Right? Matthew wants you to know one thing, and that is Jesus He's King of Kings. He's Lord of Lords. And so everything that Matthew is showing is that Jesus, as the King, wants to tell you things as the King. So what he has to say is extremely important. And what does he do as the King? Well, he teaches, he preaches, and he cares for people. So what does he teach? What does he preach? Well, it gives us this here in the Sermon on the Mount. And what we're going to see today is that the blessed understand inheritance. The blessed understand inheritance. This is where we're looking at. This is where we're spending all of our time today. Blessed are the humble or the meek, for they will inherit the earth. So the big question is, what's so great about being humble? What's so great about being meek? Maybe yours says something like, being gentle. What's so great about that you inherit the entire earth? But more than that, what in the world does it mean that you inherit the earth? What does it mean when it says inherit? So we need to break this down into three separate parts. My first point today is, what does Jesus mean by earth? My second point is, what does Jesus mean by inherit? And third, what is the attitude of the inheritors? I told you, we're getting deep today, old school sermons, right? This is like J. Vernon McGee almost. So let's talk about this. What does Jesus mean by the earth? Well, the first thing that you need to know about both the heavens and the earth is that God owns it. Who owns it? God owns it. This is what the word of the Lord has to tell us in Psalm chapter 24, verse 1. The earth and everything in it, that is the world and its inhabitants, they belong to the Lord. It also tells us in Psalm chapter 50, verse 12, that the Lord owns the world and everything in it is mine. Which means that if God owns it, that God has the right to give anything he wants to anyone at any time. But I want to really look at this word for earth. See, it's not the world. It's not this world. This word cosmos. It actually uses this word gay. It's not translated as earth as so much as land. It's the same exact word that's used other places in the book of Matthew and throughout the New Testament, where it talks about the land of Judah, the land of Israel. So it's not the cosmos, it's not everything, it's more of the land. So it can be a region, or it can mean the entire earth. Now, why in the world am I spending any time talking about that distinction? Because using this word does something that's really incredible. Jesus is going to have us look back at the promised land, but then also forward to the new heavens and new earth. Let me explain how that works. So let's take a look back at the promise of the promised land. See, God promised the land of Israel. They didn't go and cultivate it themselves. In fact, God, it says that he gives it to them. In Genesis chapter 12, God tells Abraham to go to the land that he will show him. And once Abraham entered the land, God comes back to him and says, to your offspring, I will give this land. And the land isn't just for a short amount of time. It is a permanent possession. Right? God's gifts, they don't go anywhere. It's a permanent possession. Genesis chapter 17, verse 8 tells us, and to you and your future offspring I will give the land where you are residing, all the land of Canaan, as a permanent possession. And I will be their God. And God promises and says this promise over and over and over and over again. In fact, Moses explains it like this in Exodus chapter 32, verse 13. When he's talking to God, where God's saying, oh, Moses, why don't I just move on? These people don't listen to me. This is what he says. You swore to them by yourself and declared, I will make your offspring as numerous as the star of the sky, and I will give your offspring, listen, all this land that I've promised, and they will inherit it. Notice that word. Inherit it forever. But God doesn't just give the land and nothing else. God actually provides everything they need and more. See, the land isn't just good land, but they're given the land. They inherit the land, and look at all the stuff they get. The Bible says they get great cities they didn't build. Houses fully stocked with good things they didn't buy. Cisterns they didn't dig. In vineyards and olive groves they didn't plant. In other words, when they go and they take over the promised land, yeah, there's some fighting. There's also, it tells us in the Bible, that God would send like hornets before them and drive everybody out. And so when they would enter the land, everything's already taken care of themselves. I was talking to somebody today, and they were telling me that they were remodeling their kitchen. And I said, oh man, that's got to be terrible. And they said, you don't know the half of it. I can't get to anything. I can't even plug in my coffee thing in the mornings. I said, that's got to be terrible. They didn't even go through that. You know that? They walked straight in. They didn't have to remodel anything. They didn't have to build anything. It's just all there. Just for them to have. But not only that, but God doesn't just provide this one time. He provides in every season. It tells us in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11 through 12, that is a land of mountains and valleys watered by rain from the sky. And it is a land the Lord your God cares for. In other words, you don't have to spend all of your hard manual labor caring for it. God's just going to take care of it. You don't have to dig out all the irrigation paths. You don't have to make water flow from one place to another. God says, I'm just going to make it rain. The plants need water, I'll take care of it. The plants need sunshine, I take care of it. And he says this, he is always watching over it from the beginning to the end of the year. So there's not even a place where God goes, hey, I'm going on vacation. He's saying that he's always looking after it. The Bible multiple times even calls this land the land of milk and honey. You know what that means? It means that the land is so lush, that everything is so taken care of for, that the bees freely can buzz and you just get the honey. That the animals in the land are so taken care of that they just produce milk all the time. Everything is nearly perfect. They didn't have to work to build the houses. They didn't have to work to build the vineyards. The rain takes care of a bunch of it. The animals are all taken care of. That's the promise that God gives. But not only do they get this great land that God takes care of, God says, I'll protect you. In Leviticus chapter 26, verse 6, it says, I give peace to the land, and you will lie down with nothing to frighten you. Now, we are so blessed to live in a country where I could lie down at night and trust that no one's just going to come in and just take over Starkville. That is not the reality of most places throughout history, especially ancient history. They were always having to look over their shoulder. They were always worried that someone was going to come attack and take everything that they had. In fact, read through the Old Testament. It happens all the time. But God says you don't even have to worry about it a bit. This is what it says. I will give peace to the land. You will lie down with nothing to frighten you. I will even remove dangerous animals from the land. And no sword will pass through your land. So this is what the Lord gives to the promised land. This is part of what the Lord is pointing to. That the Lord provides houses, food, water, and protection. And it's all taken care of by the Lord. That's a good deal, right? The Lord takes care of absolutely everything. But here's the deal. The promised land is conditional. Here's the condition. Throughout the Old Testament, God talks about the promised land and warns that they must follow him. In another part of Leviticus chapter 26, this is what it says, but if you do not obey me and observe all these commands, if you reject my statutes and despise my ordinances and do not observe all my commands and break my covenant, I will turn against you so that you'll be defeated by your enemies and those who hate you will rule over you. And you will flee even though no one is pursuing you. That's a big difference, right? From a land that everything is taken care of to now anybody could come and take over. In fact, you're so worried that people are going to take over. You don't lie down and worry about nothing. You can't lie down. You, in fact, can't even live in your house. You run away because you're so afraid of everything. The reality of the Israelites of this time, who Jesus is talking to, is they're not experiencing the promised land in all of its wonder. In fact, they're in the land, but they're not enjoying the promise. It's not even close. They're living under oppressive foreign rule. Rome is in charge. The king that they have in charge was placed there by the Romans. And he's not even fully in charge. Caesar's in charge. And Caesar doesn't care about them at all. Not only that, but they are heavily, heavily, heavily taxed. Who in here loves taxes? Nobody else? Okay, well, listen. Rome collected taxes. Herod collected taxes. Then other local officials collected taxes. And so this left everyone poor. I mean, they had nothing. And then the land isn't at peace. I mean, there's Roman soldiers everywhere. The Jewish people were constantly revolting, trying to get a fight and some people up against this oppressive government. And the ones not revolting are trying to get any advantage they possibly can so that they can have some power in the middle of this oppressive regime. This isn't the promised land they were supposed to get because they had turned against God. So what were the people of this time looking for? Well, they're looking for a Messiah that's ready to draw up a sword. They're looking for a Messiah that would defeat the Romans and drive out their enemies and bring back prosperity to the land that's been promised them. In fact, after Jesus rose from the dead, okay, so they saw him die. He rose from the dead. He's been with them. He's about to actually ascend back into heaven. You want to know the last question they asked him? They say, Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time? The last question that the disciples had to ask Jesus is, when are you going to bring prosperity back to Israel? The entire concept of the Messiah was one who would come in power and restore the promise that's been lost in the promised land. But Jesus is showing them that they don't have to get ready to fight. Instead, what they need to do is actually humble themselves. Part of pointing back to the promised land by using this word that can mean region reminds them of how they got all this stuff in the first place. Church, remind me, was it the Israelites that made the plagues happen in Egypt? Church, remind me, was it the Israelites that split the Red Sea? Can you remind me, was it the Israelites that made manna rain down from heaven? Was it the Israelites that made water come from a rock? Was it the Israelites that made the walls of Jericho come down? Was it the Israelites that made the hornets go and drive out all the enemies before them? Every single aspect of Jewish history and all of their victories can be pointed back to one thing, and that's God. And yet, in them, they're saying, God, we just need you just right in front of us so that we can have enough power to do it ourselves. Jesus is saying that's not how this works. God's not looking for powerful people. God's looking for humble people. In fact, this is what it says, Psalm chapter 37. This is what a lot of theologians believe that Jesus is referring to here in this verse. Psalm chapter 37 in verse 11. But the humble, who? The humble will inherit the land and will enjoy abundant prosperity. Jesus is saying, you see these arrogant Roman occupiers and greedy elites who are currently in control of the land? They're temporary. They won't be here forever. God is going to evict them. And the land of Israel will finally belong to the humble who trust in God. So how will God do this? Again, when they're hearing this, I think that a lot of their ears are thinking, great. How are we going to get Israel back? And Jesus is saying by being humble. But as you take a step back, you have to realize that God is not going to just restore the land of Israel. God's going to restore the entire earth. So this is where it points forward. The promise of a new heaven and new earth. See, God answers with eternal, permanent solutions, not temporary ones. Let me ask you this, church. What would happen if God swooped in with a military leader for Israel, They defeated the Romans, defeated their enemies, gave them all the prosperity promised, just as he had in the past. What do you think would happen? Well, what's happened before? Well, repeatedly, God has to bring them back to the land, and he blesses them. And then they move away from God. And they start worshiping idols because they really want to worship themselves. Well, then the whole thing starts over, and he has to bring in, and they get exiled from the land. And so over and over again, God brings them back to the land, gives them all the promises, gives them all the prosperity. What makes them think that this would be any different? The answer is it wouldn't be. They don't need a military leader to give them back the land and defeat their enemies here. They need something much, much, much bigger. So why would a military victory fail? Listen to this, church. External borders cannot fix internal brokenness. You know, somebody I just feel like is sitting in here today that just goes, Brant, if I just had a little bit more money in my bank account. Brant, if I could just get a relationship, or if I could get that relationship back. You know, Brant, if I could just get that promotion, or if I could finish that degree, or if I could just grow the kids up, or if I could just get that kid to come back to church, then everything will be all good again. That's not true. External borders cannot fix internal brokenness. Rome is not the Israelites' ultimate problem. Sin is their ultimate problem. If God is going to rescue Israel in any meaningful, eternal way, he has to fix the problem of evil globally. Well, how is he going to do that? He has to create a new heavens and new earth. And this isn't just a New Testament concept. Listen to this from the book of Isaiah, starting in chapter 65, starting in verse 17. For I will create new heavens and a new earth. The past events will not be remembered or come to mind. Then be glad and rejoice forever, permanent, in what I'm creating. For I will create Jerusalem to be a joy and its people to be a delight. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. And the sound of weeping and crying will no longer be heard in her. The ultimate solution is not for God to give you a temporary solution. The ultimate solution is a permanent one where he eradicates sin and creates a new heaven and a new earth. So God doesn't just fix a map. He fixes all of existence. So now our question should be, God, not how do I get this little blessing and that little blessing, but it should be, how do I get to be a part of the new heavens and the new earth? Well, let me tell you, it's not through conquering, it's not through force, it's not through earning. Instead, we inherit it as a child of the King. So secondly, what does Jesus mean by inherit? You know, as we look around right now, we can very clearly see that this is not a new heaven and not a new earth. Doesn't matter how humble you are, you haven't inherited anything yet. Well, why is that? What's God doing? Because right now it feels like there's a ton of ruthless and power-hungry people who possess the earth, right? They run governments, they lead companies, they control wealth, they have influence, they sit in positions of authority. And this can lead us, it leads me to asking questions like, why this politician? Or why is this person my boss? Or why does it always seem that the people who treat other people poorly always end up on top? We need to know two things when we ask these questions to God. First is, these people don't own anything. They don't own anything. And the second thing you need to know is that God will use their possession of the earth. He'll use their authority. He'll use everything they have for His purposes. That's a hard one to swallow, right? When we see how many people are hurting in this world. But God will always use even what's evil in this world for His purposes. So who owns the world again? Remind me. God? God owns the world, right? Well, if God owns the world, then none of it ultimately belongs to them. Every single throne is borrowed. Every kingdom is temporary. Every position is on loan from God. The rulers and leaders only possess what they do for a very short amount of time. And they can fight, they can conquer, they can scratch, they can claw, they can hoard up all they want, but eventually they leave it all behind. Well, then why does God allow some people to have so much power now? Like, I understand that it's temporary, but this suffering I'm feeling is really real right now. So why do these people who are power hungry, why do these people who seem so bad have any power at all? Because remember, if God owns the world, He can do what? He can give it to anybody He wants. Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, it says, He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. These people are not in power randomly. God uses all of it for His ultimate goal. Listen to this. This is so amazing. This is Acts chapter 17. It says, this is Paul. He says, from one man He has made every nationality to live over the whole earth and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live. In other words, who's going to be kings, who's going to grow, who's going to shrink, who's going to live, who's going to die. He appoints all of it. And He did this so that they might seek God. And perhaps they might reach out and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. So when we look in our life and we go, man, this boss is just unbearable. When we look on Fox News or on CNN or MSNBC, whatever you watch, and you just, man, you're just disgusted by what you see, whether it's this government or any other government around the world. We can take it easy because we can know that God has a purpose in all of it. I don't know what that purpose is, other than God is going to use all of this stuff so that they might seek God and perhaps they might reach out and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. How does that work? What does that look like, Brant? Let me remind you some things that God does in the Old Testament. In Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5, it tells us that God calls the Assyrians the rod of His anger. So He uses the Assyrians. In Jeremiah 25:9, He calls the evil king Nebuchadnezzar my servant. And in Acts chapter 8, you can see the persecution against the early church ends up scattering Christians, but also spreading the gospel. God uses everything in this world, and we can be sure of this, so that others might seek God and perhaps they might reach out and find Him. So here's my question. If all of that is true, what are we doing so that when people start seeking God, that they could actually hear the gospel? I think it would be so tragic for tragic things to happen in people's lives, both individually and nationally and worldwide, and we were not there to help them seek God. Because when you do not have Jesus Christ as your hope, then all they see in pain is hopelessness. They need us to be there with them so that they can know that God is actually right there. And they can reach out and they can accept Him. But remember, no matter what's going on, no matter how much you don't like leaders, or you don't like your boss, or you don't like your teachers, or whatever, their possession is not permanent. They could try and take over more, but they will never own anything in this world because this world is not theirs. However, inheritance, if we receive an inheritance from God, that's far more than temporary. That's permanent. Inheritance is never borrowed. It's not temporary. It's permanent. In other words, you own it. This is what 1 Peter 1, 3 through 4 has to say about your inheritance. Blessed be the God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, because His great mercy has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, and kept in heaven for you. Well, then the question should be not how do I make more money, or how do I move up, how do I get my promotion, how do I get what I want. The real question that we should have in this life is, how do I receive an inheritance from the Lord? That should be the most important question that we have for ourselves in this life. How do I receive the inheritance that the Lord wants to give me? Well, the only way to receive an inheritance in the Bible is through family. No exceptions. Now, I know if you wanted to, you could write up a will and you could give your CD collection of Smash Mouth or whatever you have that you think is special, and you could say, I want this to go to my best friend. Or you've seen on the news where people are like, I want to give all of my wealth to my cat, right? That doesn't happen in the Bible. There's only one way that you could pass down an inheritance, and that is to your family. In fact, you could look in Numbers chapter 27, and it shows us exactly how the inheritance goes down the familial line until it gets to the next of kin. Because the main point of inheritance is not just giving stuff to people. The main point of inheritance is so that the land that they possess will stay in the family forever. That's the point. So what does this mean for us? If we want to receive an inheritance, you have to be part of the family. Which means that you must be adopted. It's not something you can earn. It's not something you can qualify for. Instead, it must come as a gift from God. And adoption has always been the desire of God, even in the Old Testament. I want to show you this. If you look in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 19, listen to what the Lord has to say. How long to make you my sons and give you a desirable land, the most beautiful inheritance of all the nations. You will call me my father and never turn away from me. That's in the Old Testament. Well, man, the New Testament takes this idea of adoption and really runs with it. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5 says, in love he predestined us for adoption to a sonship through Jesus Christ. Galatians chapter 4, 4 through 7 explains this even more, how we can actually be adopted. When the time came to completion, God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of His sons into our heart, crying, Abba, Father. So you are a slave, but a son. And if a son, then God has made you an heir. All of this happens through Jesus Christ. None of that happens without Jesus Christ. So you might say, well, I come to church and I'm a good person. And Brant, I tithe. You never complain about that. And I'm willing to help. And I'm nice to people at work. I hold doors open. I always am nice to pregnant lady on trains. Whatever you think is good, right? None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that you put your trust in Jesus Christ. Because without him, there is no adoption. Without him, there is no forgiveness of sins. Without him, there is no inheritance. And without him, there is no hope. So what does adoption affect? The adoption we receive through Jesus Christ is what moves us actually through the Beatitudes. The poor in spirit shows your spiritual bankruptcy. That you're spiritually fatherless, helpless, and unable to move forward on your own. Spiritual bankruptcy leads to mourning over your sin, which leads to humbling you. Now, all of this leads to being adopted. Receiving the kingdom of God, enjoying the new heavens and new earth, and thus being completely comforted. Here's the truth. When you're adopted, you can't just be the same. Your identity has completely changed. Your future has changed. Your hope has changed. All from people who place our trust in things that do not matter, into people who become sons and daughters of the Most High and co-heirs with Christ. Not because we've earned it, not because we are entitled to it, but because we have received a gift that you never deserved in the first place. This leaves people meek and humbled. I'm going to be talking more about this next week, but I want to resolve some of what we've talked about this week. What does meek actually mean? It doesn't mean weak. It doesn't mean a pushover. It doesn't mean shy. In fact, this word for meek is the same exact word for gentle and what Jesus says right here in Matthew 11:29. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle. I'm meek. I'm humble and lowly at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Well, if Jesus is saying that he's meek, would you say that Jesus is a big old pushover? Do you think that Jesus is weak? I don't think so. That's because meekness and gentleness is power under control. But let me be more specific. It's under God's control. Can I say that again for somebody? Because I've always heard that being meek and gentle is power under control. But I go, okay, well then under whose control? My control? You're going to trust me with power? Don't do that. I have the heart of man in me. I could be wicked. I could snap at somebody. I don't know how much power I could actually control. Meekness is power under control, but more specifically under God's control. So instead, you trust God to exalt you at the right time. It's the gracious refusal to resort to force or manipulation or aggression to get ahead. Instead, you just wait for God to give you what you need when you need it. It's this idea of if you're prideful, you're always looking for power. If you're meek and you're humble, you're always looking to surrender. And here's the truth, guys. God has given you many, many, many gifts and abilities and relationships and favor in the eyes of those around you. But you have to ask, are you going to use the gifts for God, or you continue to abuse your gifts to just get what you want? And here's a reality check for you. Okay? I hear many, many Christians, they tell me that they will follow whatever God says. Would you say that about yourself? You know what? If God told me to do it, I would go do it. But here's the thing. When I then ask, what was the last thing God told you to do? They can't give me an answer. Or when they do give me an answer, it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, decades ago. I believe the Lord is calling us to far more things than we actually react to. And we don't follow him because we're so prideful and busy with our own agenda that we haven't surrendered to his. So why do we force our way forward and ignore God and even willingly hurt others in the process? It's because we're afraid that if we don't grab what we want, we'll lose out. But what do you really lose out on? Anything that you could grab in this world is temporary. However, the gift of salvation is forever. I want you to look at this parable. And then I'm going to the main points and everything. But look at this parable. And I want you to see how we need to realize what we've been given and how humble surrender is the only response to the salvation that Jesus has for us. Let me give you a little bit of background. Jesus is dining at the home of Simon, who is a Pharisee. And while they're at the table, this woman comes in, and she's got a pretty bad reputation. And she breaks all social protocols. I mean, she starts crying at Jesus' feet, and she wipes them with her hair, and she's kissing his feet and pouring expensive perfume on them. And Simon, he's disgusted. He doesn't say anything out loud, but he's offended by this woman who's a sinner that she's doing this to Jesus. Because in his mind, Jesus is supposed to have this great reputation. He shouldn't have this lowly woman approach him like this. And so Jesus gives this parable. This is in Luke chapter 7, starting in verse 41. And a certain moneylender had two debtors. He owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Well, Simon answered him, the one, I suppose. I like how he says suppose here, don't you? I suppose it's the one whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you've judged rightly. Then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. But she has wet her feet with my tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss. But from the time that I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. Your life will reflect how much you realize how much you've been forgiven. If you're still trying to live out your agenda, if you're still worried about what you want to do, then maybe you haven't realized how much Jesus has fully forgiven. But if you've realized how much Jesus has really done in your life, you will be like this woman and surrender everything that you possibly can for Jesus. Here's my main point. I want you to live as heirs. So how do we do that? Well, it's moving from a fighting mindset to a grateful mindset. See, Simon the Pharisee, he was fighting. He was doing everything to protect his own reputation and earn his own way. He thought he was good enough. He didn't really need Jesus. The fact that Jesus came to his house, Simon probably thought, yeah, I'm making Jesus look good. But the woman was grateful. And she knew she was bankrupt. She knew that Jesus could give her what she needed, and she surrendered completely. Living as an heir means you stop pushing your agenda and start trusting God's agenda. You stop acting entitled. You stop trying to manipulate every situation. You stop trying to force what you want to happen. Instead, you give thanks to Jesus because you have a secure future and a hope that does not fade. So when you live as heirs, you live as one who is humble. I have a challenge for you. This is a weird challenge. This really isn't helping anybody but you. But I just want you to deliberately choose the worst spot one time this week. That you don't park. Now I understand. Some of you have health concerns. Don't listen to what I'm saying here. I'm talking to us who can walk if we wanted to, right? Park in the worst spot. Pick the longer line at the grocery store. Why do I want you to do this? Because so often we get in our heads that we have to have the best, and that our time is the most important thing, and that our agenda is the most important thing. And I'm asking just to shake it up one last time, right? Mix it up. Choose where you're not choosing that. and take some time. And while you're waiting in that line another 2 minutes, while you're having to take another 20 steps to get into the door, I just want you to say to yourself, I'm an heir. I don't need to scratch and claw. All I need to do is trust in God's promise. In other words, it's okay. I could be inconvenienced because I have a future that's waiting for me. You know, Jesus, who created the whole world, he saw us in our sin and our separation from God. You know what he did? He didn't say, I don't really feel like doing that. That seems hard. You know, I'm in heaven. I got it all pretty good up here. No, he saw us and he says, I want to rescue those people. He didn't worry about his own agenda. He worried about God's agenda. And we could get really complicated with what all that means, right? But essentially, he says, Father, I'll do whatever you want me to do. So he came, fully God, fully man, born of a virgin, lived a sinless life. And not only did he come to perform miracles and teach, but he also came to die on a cross, taking our place by taking all the sin on himself. That whoever believes in him will not perish, but they'll have everlasting life. And that you could turn away from your sin and follow Jesus. Well, he rose from the grave 3 days later, defeating death. And he now is Lord of all, reigning and waiting to return again. Through Jesus, we receive our forgiveness. And this is something you must respond to and respond right now. And say, Jesus, I surrender my agenda for whatever you would have me to do.